I wanted to go over chapter 4. We have different elements of fiction. We're laying out the groundwork for how we can start to consider and analyze how a piece is working. So last week, I think we had elements of fiction and how to read fiction. And this week, we have what is fiction, short stories versus novels, and then setting character and plot. These are all necessary components for us to start to consider in isolation as we think about how they're utilized to synthesize into some type of fantastic work of fiction, whether it's a short story or a drama or even a novel like Candide. Um, the OER begins by talking about the difference between fiction and nonfiction. And some may disparage fiction as being just creative works. They're fake, they're false, they're things that have never happened. And, I think that that's kind of a disservice because I certainly think that within fiction, it's not false. It often tells us truth about people, motives, fears, time periods. It can be invented, but it's still constructed in a way that it can give us a lot of glimpses of truth about ourselves and about humanity. So I think it's important for us as we start to look at fiction, not so much to consider, like, hey, did this happen? Because we certainly have that question with something like Open Boat by Stephen Crane, which we're going to get to later in the semester, which is based on historical events, but it's fictionalized. So it's not so much to say, oh, this is a non fictional representation of his survival in a boat, but, it certainly has elements of it. Instead, we want to concentrate on how the story is built. What effect does the construction have on conveying the meaning? Because, like in an essay, everything that you put into an essay has a rhetorical decision in mind. You're making an argument and you're trying to construct it in the most ferocious way possible. You're trying to convey this argument. And so you're utilizing sources. You're deciding whether to use direct quote or whether you're going to paraphrase. You're trying to figure out the best structure. You're trying to look at how you're going to make this argument as you transition from point to point. All of it is a construct to make the most solid argument that you can. And much in that same way, fiction, the author is trying to construct this vehicle of entertainment that at the same time is capable of really showing us quite a bit, moving us in a lot of ways, maybe even, as an aspect of rhetoric. So, within the OER, we get into the difference between a short story and a novel. It's kind of basic. You can look at it and say, well, obviously, a novel is going to be a lot more long. Yeah, it's going to be longer. But this means that the author has more time to kind of build the characters, develop the plot, take us to different places, show us different things, evoke different feelings. Again, when we're thinking about setting up a story in a way that it's going to convey something, each of those are going to be decisions the author makes in order to kind of move us to the maximum effect. A short story, on the other hand, being so compact, we really have to slow down. We have to read it. We have to consider the economy of words that are being utilized so that every single action, every single utterance, every single description, every gesture is going to have much more impact. You don't have a lot of room in a short story. You have to make sure everything counts. And so it is a lot more impactful. Everything that happens in there really requires a little more analysis. And so that's something to consider as we look at short stories. Um, the OER also talked about character, and we talked about, or it talked about flat characters versus round characters. And we start to think about like the primary characters versus the secondary characters. Of course, effective characterization, the author does a lot more than simply cut out paper dolls and move them around a plot. Like all this stuff happened to this character. Oh, it's so terrible. An effective character can, evoke emotion. We start to empathize with them. We start to feel for them. They can put us in certain situations. And so we don't think about the character so much, at least we should try not to think about the character so much in terms of, oh, that's a good character, or that's a bad character, and that's a mean character. Instead, start to think about it in terms of what's driving the character? What does that character want? What is shaping that character? Um, And I think that'll help unlock a little bit of perspective as we're looking at the characters as they're moving through these plots and how it kind of shapes the overall message or the plot itself. Now, the plot itself, it's not just a series of events of things that happened. There's certainly a manner in which things happen. Not all of these stories are going to be point A to point C, and that's it. That's the plot. If the author is thinking about how can I make this as most impactful as possible, maybe I'm going to really point out this part, or maybe I'm going to really emphasize this part. Maybe I'll start with this point. Plot can sometimes even be nonlinear. If you think about a movie like Pulp Fiction, where it's like the complete linear plot is like broken up and things are moved around. We start with something that happened towards the end. And this happens in fiction as well. You'll see this with something like The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. You might see it in Slaughterhouse Five by Vonnegut. So these things certainly occur quite a bit. These are just a couple of examples I could think of off the top of my head. We think about the structure of the plot. I know the OER gave us like the inciting event, and then we kind of get to the rising tension. We get to the climax of it, and then we have the denouement, and then the resolution. So we kind of have the arc that goes all the way through. And for as long as dramas or fiction has been created or studied, people have thought about how the structure of the plot kind of takes place. I mean, this is something you're going to get key on. You'll become stronger at this. And if you do it for long enough, become an English major, it may actually ruin every movie that you've ever seen because you're going to recognize exactly what's coming next. It's not really a strong advertisement for becoming an English major, I'm sure. But when we think about the plot, we really have to think about not just how the action rises or falls or how we get to that resolution, but we also have to think about the various conflicts within the plot. That usually drives the action. All right. We get into the setting. The setting is extremely important. We think about it in a large scale of like time and place, historical event, or it could be really small, like a room or a dark road. And the setting oftentimes also is extremely important, considering the different elements within the setting, how it's being described, and the elements, or not the elements, the different features of it that are kind of evoking different emotions or utilized for structures within the plot itself. So anyway, that is a little bit about the elements. I wanted to go over that because this is basically where literary analysis begins. It's not just saying, hey, I read the plot, it was kind of exciting. What about it was exciting? And if you start to think, well, it was the way that the plot kind of rose to a climax very quickly. And then we had elongated tension before we got to a resolution. You'll be able to kind of identify that, putting words to the actual aspects that were utilized for effect. So, all right, that's what I have for now.